there are some losses that don't feel real until you see them printed on paper, not in a text message, not in a fight, not even in a courtroom. On paper, a signature at the bottom, a date stamped in ink, a sentence that says you have to leave. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just losing a marriage, I was losing the house, too. And the worst part? I didn't even see it coming. From the outside, my life looked stable. That's what people always assume when you live in a decent neighborhood and keep your lawn trimmed and wave at your neighbors like everything is fine. But stability on the outside is easy. It's the inside that falls apart quietly. I met my husband when I was still the kind of woman who believed love was enough to keep you safe. He didn't sweep me off my feet in some dramatic way. He did something more dangerous. He made me feel protected. He spoke with confidence, like he always knew what to do, like life couldn't surprise him, like problems were just puzzles he could solve. And when you're with someone like that long enough, you start leaning on them, not because you're weak, because you think you're building a partnership. When we bought the house, I thought we were doing what couples are supposed to do, taking the next step, putting roots down, becoming something permanent. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a dream home from a magazine, but it was ours. 2 stories, a quiet backyard, a kitchen window that poured sunlight onto the counters in the morning, a living room where our voices echoed the first night because we didn't have furniture yet. I still remember that feeling, standing in an empty house with keys in my hand and thinking, this is the beginning. I pictured a future that felt simple, holidays, milestones, calm mornings, a routine that lasted. I didn't know that a house can be a dream and a weapon, not because the building changes, because the people inside it do. The shift in our marriage didn't happen like a movie scene. There was no screaming match that made it obvious, no cheating confession with tears and suitcases. It was quieter than that. It was tone. It was the way conversations started turning into announcements. It was the way he stopped asking my opinion and started telling me what was happening. It was the way he handled money, the way he handled everything else, completely, confidently, and without including me. At first, I thought it was a good thing, a relief, like I didn't have to carry the weight of the details. Don't worry, he'd say, I've got it. And I believed him, because in the beginning, I've got it sounds like love. But after a while, it starts sounding like control. The first time I noticed something was off, it wasn't even about the house. It was a moment, small, easy to ignore. I asked him about a bill that looked different than usual. The amount was higher. He didn't answer the question. He answered me. He smiled like I was overthinking and said, "It's handled." That was his favorite word. Handled. Like the details were beneath me. Like my questions were inconvenient. Like my involvement was unnecessary. And over time, I stopped asking. Not because I didn't care, because every time I asked, it felt like I was starting a fire. So I chose peace. I kept the house running. I kept life moving. I handled the groceries, the schedules, the emotional work of living beside someone who had started drifting away. And while I was making sure the home still felt warm, he was making decisions in the background. Then the distance became real. He stayed out later, he answered with one-word texts, he stopped looking at me when I spoke. I'm not someone who needs constant attention, but there's a difference between independence and being ignored. One night, I asked him something I'd been swallowing for months. "Are you happy?" He didn't even pretend to think about it. He stared at the wall like he was searching for the easiest exit, and he said, "I don't know." Those 3 words didn't sound cruel, but they were. Because if someone doesn't know whether they're happy with you, they've already started living without you in their mind. After that, everything moved fast. The space conversation, the maybe we should separate conversation, the cold tone he used when he said we, like it was a business contract that wasn't working anymore. I tried to fix it at first. I was raised to believe that commitment means you don't quit just because things get hard. So I suggested counseling. I suggested time. I suggested patience. He didn't fight me. He didn't argue. He just withdrew. And that withdrawal told me something I didn't want to accept. I was the only one trying to keep the marriage alive. When the divorce became official in our conversations, I panicked for one reason more than any other: the house. Because in my mind, the house was the one solid thing left. If I could keep it, I could rebuild everything else. If I lost it, I didn't know what would be left of my life. At first, he acted reasonable. He talked about fairness. He talked about doing this the right way. He even said he didn't want it to get ugly. But then something changed. The moment the divorce became real, the way he spoke about the house changed too. It went from our home to the property. That word made my skin crawl. Property. Like it wasn't where I cooked, where I cried, where I lived. Like it wasn't the place I thought I'd grow old. Then came the paperwork. Documents I didn't understand. Statements with numbers that didn't match what I remembered. And one afternoon, he said a sentence so casually, it almost sounded like a suggestion. "I don't think you'll be able to keep it." I stared at him, waiting for him to realize what he just said. But he didn't. He said it like he was stating weather. I didn't answer right away because I felt something rising in me. Shock, humiliation, fear. Not just because I didn't want to lose the house, but because I realized in that moment, he had already decided what I deserved. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around at the room that still held pieces of my life. My clothes, my books, the small things I'd chosen to make it feel like home. And I wondered how I had become someone who could be removed so easily. That's when I started asking questions I should have asked years ago. What exactly is in my name? What exactly is in his? What have I signed? What was changed without me really understanding it? And the answers didn't come quickly. But the little pieces I did find were enough to scare me, because it wasn't just that the marriage was ending, it was that the foundation of my life, my financial stability, my sense of safety, had been built in a way where I didn't hold the keys. I always thought losing the house would feel like a dramatic moment, like a final argument, like a slammed door, like tears in the driveway. But in the beginning, it felt like quiet realization, the kind that happens when you finally understand that love doesn't protect you if the paperwork doesn't. And that was the moment I promised myself something. If I was going to lose the life I built, I wasn't going to lose myself, too. The next morning, I did something I had never done in my entire marriage. I opened my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and started looking at everything. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not with hope, with facts. I logged into accounts I hadn't checked in years. Some I didn't even know existed until I searched through old emails and found login links buried under paperless billing notifications. And as I clicked through statement after statement, I felt a slow coldness spread through my chest. Because this wasn't just about a divorce. This was about how deeply unprepared I was to stand alone in a life I thought I helped build. I called my sister first, not the one from the other story, my real sister. She answered on the second ring and immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "I think I might lose the house." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "What do you mean, might?" And I realized I didn't even know how to explain it, because I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what mattered legally. I didn't know what I had the right to fight for. I just knew what it would do to me if I lost it. That same week, I met with a lawyer. The office smelled like fresh paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. Everything was quiet, professional, controlled. I brought a folder that looked impressive, like I was prepared. But the truth is, it was mostly random things I had collected in panic. My lawyer flipped through the papers and started asking questions. How much is left on the mortgage? Is your name on the deed? Any refinance in the last 5 years? Any equity loans? "What's your credit score?" The first two, I answered confidently. The rest, I guessed. And every time I guessed, I hated how weak I sounded. Not because I wasn't intelligent, because I had been trained to be uninvolved. My lawyer didn't judge me, but she didn't sugarcoat it either. She leaned back in her chair and said, "Okay, we need to get you informed. Quickly." Quickly. That word felt like a clock ticking in my skull, because divorce doesn't wait for your emotions to catch up. It moves. Deadlines, disclosures, temporary orders, and every one of those steps is easier for the person who already knows the financial picture. When my lawyer requested full documentation, my husband didn't refuse. He didn't argue. He did something smarter. He delayed. "Oh, I'll get that to you. I'm still pulling it together. I don't have it on me." He dragged it out just long enough to make me feel like I was being unreasonable for pushing. But I pushed anyway, because now I understood something I hadn't understood before. When a person doesn't want transparency, it's rarely because the truth is harmless. When the refinance paperwork finally showed up, I stared at it like it was written in another language. My lawyer read it quickly and pointed to things with her pen. Loan amount, interest rate, monthly payment. And then she turned a page and said, "Okay, this part matters." She explained that the refinance had changed the structure of the house in a way I didn't fully realize. Not just a new monthly payment, not just a different term. The equity, our equity, had been touched. Money had been pulled out, and it wasn't sitting in a savings account. It wasn't waiting for our future. It was gone. I felt my throat tighten. Where did it go? My lawyer looked at me carefully. "We can trace it. But yes, this will affect what you can do." That night, I confronted my husband in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter like he'd been expecting it. I held the papers in my hands, shaking slightly. "What is this? Why did we refinance like this?" He didn't flinch. He looked at me the way someone looks at a person who's late to their own life. "I told you, we needed to." "For what? Where did the money go?" His jaw tightened just slightly. "It went where it needed to go." That was his answer to everything. Where it needed to go. Like I wasn't allowed to know. Like I didn't deserve details. Like the truth was a privilege. I stared at him and said the one sentence that came from somewhere deeper than anger. "You kept me out of my own life." He laughed, quietly, almost bored. He said, "I didn't keep you out. You didn't ask." That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because he wasn't wrong. I hadn't asked. I hadn't asked because I trusted him. I hadn't asked because I didn't want conflict. I hadn't asked because I thought marriage meant we were on the same team. But suddenly, I realized something painful. My trust had become his advantage. A week later, we sat down for mediation. The room was small, neutral, and cold. The kind of room where feelings don't matter. His lawyer spoke confidently. My lawyer spoke carefully. And my husband sat there with calm eyes and a relaxed posture, like none of this was personal. Then the mediator asked the question that made my heart pound. "What's the plan for the house?" I didn't wait. I said, "I want it." I said it clearly, firmly, like the strength in my voice could anchor the walls. My husband's lawyer didn't even look surprised. She just said, "She won't qualify." The words hit my chest like a punch. "Excuse me?" She continued, calm and clinical. "It's unlikely she will qualify to refinance on her income alone with the current balance and obligations." My face felt hot. I looked at my husband, expecting him to react, to correct it, to soften it, to say something human. He didn't. He stared at the table like he was already imagining himself walking away clean. I heard my voice come out quieter than I wanted. "Why are you doing this?" He finally looked up, and with the calmest tone he said, "I'm not doing anything. This is just reality." Reality. That word felt like a slap, because reality wasn't supposed to sound like a weapon. My lawyer pulled me aside for a private moment and said something that made my throat close. She whispered, "If you keep the house, you'll be house poor. You'll have no cushion, no freedom, one emergency, and you're underwater." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I'd work more, do more, cut back. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew. The house wasn't just expensive. It was set up in a way that made it nearly impossible for me to hold alone. And the cruel part was, I was only learning that now, at the exact moment I needed power the most. I went home that night and walked through the rooms again. But this time, I didn't walk through them like they were mine. I walked through them like a person saying goodbye without permission. In the hallway, I touched the wall where a family photo used to hang. In the kitchen, I stood where I used to make dinner. In the living room, I imagined an empty space, the furniture gone, the echo back, and I whispered something that made my eyes burn. I can't believe I'm going to lose this. Then I did something I never expected. I asked myself a question that felt like betrayal. What if losing the house is the only way I survive? That thought made me sick, but it also made something inside me shift. Because the truth is, I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the last symbol of the life I thought I had. And maybe that was the real danger. Because symbols don't keep you safe. Knowledge does. Boundaries do. Freedom does. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand if keeping this house meant living trapped and terrified, then maybe the house wasn't home anymore. Maybe it was just the last place my old self was clinging to. And I could feel it coming. The moment when I'd have to decide whether I wanted to stay or start over. The decision didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen with a judge's voice echoing in a quiet room. It happened on a random Tuesday night when I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by paperwork and silence, and I finally understood the truth. I wasn't fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting to not feel erased. That night, I spread everything out in front of me: mortgage statements, refinancing documents, pay stubs, a half-written budget in my notebook. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. My phone was face down because I couldn't handle another message. And my hands were shaking a little, not from fear of him, but from the weight of reality. I wrote the numbers down one more time: monthly mortgage payment, insurance, property taxes, utilities, maintenance. Then I wrote my income underneath, and I stared, because the gap wasn't huge, but it was deadly. It was the kind of gap that looks manageable until life happens, until your car breaks down, until you get sick, until your job changes, until your roof leaks. It was the kind of gap that keeps you awake every night. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Keeping the house wouldn't save me. It would trap me. The next day, my lawyer called with an update. Her voice was professional, but her words were blunt. "The house is likely going to be sold," she said, "unless you have a co-borrower, significant cash to buy him out, or a way to refinance quickly." I swallowed hard. I already knew the answer. I didn't have a co-borrower, I didn't have cash sitting around, and refinancing wasn't just hard, it was nearly impossible now with my credit and the current structure of the mortgage. "Okay," I whispered. After we got off the phone, I just sat there, staring at my living room. Everything looked normal. The throw pillow on the couch, the little plant by the window, the picture frame on the shelf. The kind of normal that makes you question yourself. Because how can something be ending when it still looks the same? That's the cruelty of it. Your life can fall apart completely, and the furniture doesn't move. Later that week, my husband stopped by to grab the last few items he hadn't taken yet. He walked in like he still belonged there, like this wasn't a home being dismantled, like I wasn't standing in the middle of my own loss. He didn't say hello the way he used to. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He just moved through the hallway, picking things up like he was checking off a list. I watched him for a moment, and felt something build inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something sharper, awareness. And I asked him, "Did you plan this?" He paused. He looked at me like I was asking a strange question. "What do you mean?" he said. "The house," I said. "The refinance, the setup, the way I'm not going to qualify to keep it." His face stayed calm, too calm. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach drop. "I did what I had to do." There was no apology in his voice, no guilt, just justification. I stared at him and whispered, "So you knew?" And he didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He just looked away slightly and said, "It's not personal." Not personal. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Because how can you take someone's home and claim it isn't personal? But that's what some people do. They cause damage and call it logic. They break your life and call it strategy. I stepped closer, my voice quiet but steady. I know what the house meant to me. His eyes flickered, just slightly. Then he said, "You'll be fine." Those words, the same words he used when he didn't want to carry responsibility. You'll be fine. Like my pain was just a temporary inconvenience. Like my strength was his excuse to be cruel. And in that moment, something inside me snapped into place. He wasn't going to save me. He wasn't going to soften. He wasn't going to care. So I had to stop waiting for him to become the man I married, because he wasn't coming back. The next step was the real estate agent. She was nice, friendly, professional, the kind of person who smiled warmly while casually describing how your home would soon belong to strangers. She walked through each room, talking about lighting and staging. "You'll want to keep it neutral," she said. "Buyers like to imagine themselves here." Imagine themselves here. In my kitchen, in my living room, in my bedroom. I nodded politely while my chest felt tight. Then she said, "We'll schedule the first showings this weekend." And suddenly it felt real. Not might, not possibly, real. That weekend, I cleaned the house like someone was coming to judge my worth. I wiped counters that were already clean. I vacuumed carpets that didn't have dirt. I folded towels in the bathroom like it was a hotel. And then I realized something so absurd it almost made me cry again. I was preparing my home to impress strangers while I was falling apart inside it. During the first showing, I left the house and sat in my car a few streets away. I watched the time on my phone. I kept imagining them walking through my rooms, opening my closets, looking at my windows, judging my life in silence. And all I could think was, I built this for someone who didn't protect me. When the showing ended, I walked back in and the house smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like the air had been disturbed, like something sacred had been touched without permission. That night, I started packing. Not everything, just the things that felt too personal to leave until the last minute. My favorite mug, a framed photo of my mother, a small box of letters I'd saved for years. And with each item, I felt a strange combination of grief and relief. Because packing meant this was really happening. But packing also meant I was choosing to not break. I was choosing to move forward. The offers came quickly. Maybe it was the market, maybe it was luck, maybe it was just timing. But the moment we accepted an offer, the house stopped being mine emotionally. It became paperwork again. Inspections, appraisals, closing dates. I felt numb going through it. The day of the inspection, a man walked through my home checking things with a flashlight. He opened cabinets, looked under sinks, tested faucets. He wasn't rude, but it felt invasive, like someone was measuring the value of the place where I cried at 2 a.m. I stood in the doorway and realized this home held my heartbreak, and no one cared. All they cared about was whether the plumbing worked. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off and whispered to myself, "This is the last chapter here." And for the first time, I didn't feel only sadness. I felt something else. Power. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind that comes when you stop begging things to stay the same. The kind that comes when you accept that survival sometimes means letting go. I didn't want to lose the house, but I also didn't want to lose my future. And now I understood. Those were not the same thing. The house was a symbol. My future was real. And I wasn't going to sacrifice my future to hold on to a symbol of a marriage that was already gone. So I made a decision. Not because I was ready, because I had to be. I was going to walk out of that house and still be standing. The last night in the house didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. The furniture was gone. The rooms echoed again the way they did the first night we moved in, back when I thought echoes meant possibility. Now the echo felt like an ending. I walked through the house barefoot, letting myself take it in one last time. The hallway, the kitchen tile, the soft light near the window, the places that still held memories, even when nothing else was left. I sat on the floor in my bedroom and whispered the only thing I needed to hear. I did my best. Not for him, for me, because I wasn't going to carry shame into the next chapter of my life. The next morning, I woke up early, packed the final box, and loaded my car. The house still looked normal from the outside. Same driveway, same front steps, same neighborhood, like it hadn't noticed my life was being pulled apart. Closing day happened in a quiet room with too much paperwork. My husband arrived separately, calm, controlled, like he had already moved on months ago. His lawyer talked in numbers. My lawyer talked in options. Everyone spoke like this was just a transaction. Then the papers slid toward me. I stared at them for one long second because I knew what the signature meant. It meant the house was no longer mine. Not the living room where I built a routine, not the kitchen where I tried to hold things together, not the walls I once believed would protect me. I picked up the pen. My hand shook, and I signed. The moment it was done, someone said, "Congratulations." I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like surviving. I walked out to my car and sat in the silence for a minute, staring at the steering wheel like it might tell me what to do next. And that's when something unexpected happened. I didn't collapse. I didn't fall apart. I just breathed. Because the truth was, I was still here. I drove back to the house one last time to grab something small I'd left behind. The inside looked empty and unfamiliar, like it already belonged to someone else. I stood in the center of the living room and finally let myself understand it. This wasn't just about losing a building. It was about losing the version of my life where I thought love automatically meant safety. Because security isn't a promise someone makes when they're happy. Security is being included. Security is knowing what you sign. Security is understanding what's in your name. Security is having boundaries strong enough to survive, even when your heart doesn't want to. I looked around once more, whispered, "Goodbye," and walked out. I locked the door. I handed the key over. My new place wasn't big, it wasn't perfect, it didn't have the backyard or the familiar window light, but it had something the old house didn't give me anymore: peace. The first night, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel lonely, it felt safe, because no one could shut me out of my own life now. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt slowly. Not just finances, confidence. I checked my credit, I tracked my money, I asked questions without apologizing. I stopped feeling ashamed for not knowing everything before, because shame doesn't rebuild a life. Action does. And if there's one thing I learned from losing the house after the divorce, it's this. Love should never require you to be uninformed. Love should never require silence. Love should never require you to hand someone the keys to your future and just hope they don't lock you out. Yes, I lost the house, but I didn't lose myself, because the real home wasn't the building. The real home was me. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes writing it out helps more than we realize. Leaving a like helps the story reach others who might need to hear it. And if you appreciate calm, honest stories inspired by real experiences, you're welcome to subscribe to Untold American Lives. Thank you for listening.